Hello, my name is Benjamin Carr, and this is my effective communication and decision making final presentation. This presentation will cover leadership, decision making, and mentoring. Now, let's get started with defining those terms. The definition of leadership is the position or function of a leader, a person who guides or directs a group. Sometimes that group can be broken down into other small groups that all can kind of come together for a cohesive goal. Decision making is the act or process of making choices or decisions with a group of people, especially in business or politics. Decision making and leadership really coincide with each other. Generally, leaders or people in leadership roles are the ones making decisions or kind of giving insight to others as to how to make decisions. So those two really go hand in hand. Then along with those, you have mentoring. A mentor is a wise and trusted counselor or teacher, also an influential senior sponsor or supporter, someone that supports the person that they are guiding along. Generally, it's someone who's been in their shoes or is in the shoes that the person wants to be in, someone with a similar background, and that's kind of where that trust is built in naturally. Now, if we're talking about leadership, we can get into the communication aspect. It's very vital and incredibly important to leadership on how a leader communicates and understanding how to communicate. And a great way to do that is to understand kind of transformational leaders. You know, you look at great leaders across the board, Martin Luther King Jr. You get into sports, you talk about Jim Valvano, who's pictured up in the top right. There's a reason some leaders are great at what they do, and a lot of it is how they communicate. And understanding one thing with Jim Valvano especially is the rhetorical triangle. You'll see a little bit more of that on the next slide. But Jim Valvano, in his 1993 ESPY speech, really uses overlapping sports and his personal struggle to persuade people towards a bigger cause. Jimmy V was struggling with cancer at the time and used his platform as a basketball coach to start the Jimmy V Foundation for funding for cancer research. And so his struggle and sports kind of coincided to persuade people to do something towards a bigger cause. And with that, you look at the rhetorical triangle here, using ethos, which is credibility, pathos, emotional appeal, and logos, reason or logic. Right there in the graphic, you can see just kind of a breakdown of the different pieces and kind of where they fit into the whole thing. You go back to Jimmy V once again, you talk about his ability to use pathos, the emotional appeal, his struggle, his personal struggle, and then tying that in with logos, the logic. Okay, well, if he's struggling with cancer, let's fund cancer research. You know, let's use this platform, this stage right now to talk about how, not how he can help himself, but how people down the road can be helped. And that's a transformational leader understanding the rhetorical triangle and using it towards his advantage. Then you move on from leadership to motivation, and with that communication piece and understanding that, you can then begin to motivate people. And motivation is described here as motivation is the internal processes that activate, guide, and maintain behavior, especially goal-directed behavior. We talked about earlier how leaders kind of lead a group of people towards a goal. They use motivation to do that. And this can generally be one of the most difficult parts of leadership right here is the motivational aspect. And understanding how to properly motivate people is very important because you end up in groups of people, you have a group of people who have different stories, backgrounds, and experiences, and generally you have to motivate all those people towards one cause, one common goal. And that can be rather difficult based on those stories, backgrounds, experiences. Everyone kind of has a different view on things, and as a leader, it's your job to unite them and figure out how to unite them, and it's kind of a never-ending problem-solving piece that leaders go through on a frequent basis. In order to properly motivate people and learn how to motivate those different people towards one cause, understanding intrinsic and extrinsic motivational pieces is massively important. Extrinsic motivation involves external reward or punishment based on the activity going on. Intrinsic motivation is kind of an internal Motivational piece, generally something that you feel a positive emotion that is highly satisfying. And a lot of research has shown that intrinsic motivation can be far more successful than extrinsic motivation. You talk about extrinsic motivation, that might be a dollar amount on a compensation piece for selling X amount of items. Intrinsic motivation is something beyond that, where you're pushing someone a little deeper to push a little harder. Maybe it's a competition between the two highest salespeople. You know, they get that intrinsic motivation of being the best. They may not be compensated to be the best, but simply they want to fight to be the best. Intrinsic gains tend to last a little longer, and generally you can use those intrinsic gains to really push people to affect their daily habits and routines. With the Concordia University baseball team, that's one thing we really try to do when we motivate our guys, is we try to talk about intrinsic motivation. You know, we're not just trying to use these guys for another win. We want to affect them on a daily level with their habits and their routines, and use the effects of that, the effects of the intrinsic motivation, to then help us win baseball games on the back end. Moving on to mentoring and servant leadership kind of tie together there. Can be described as a set of practices that enriches lives of individuals, builds organizations, and ultimately creates a more just and caring world. Mentoring, as described earlier, a trusted person that may be in a field or have a similar background to someone, and can kind of take them under their wing and show them how things should be. And a lot of the times a mentor is giving someone an opportunity or a chance that they wish they would have had that they never got, and is trying to pay that forward. You can show right here, building trust, a relationship, and showing vulnerability is a huge part of mentoring. And then Zwilling talks about keeping the relationship positive and productive. In a mentoring relationship, it should always be kind of slowly gaining ground towards a bigger goal. So the short-term application personally for all these, we talk about coaching. My current role is a graduate assistant at Concordia University for baseball. And so right now my job is coaching baseball. And so the short-term application of these things, you know, you talk about leadership, you talk about decision-making and mentoring. I'm kind of doing those three things on a daily basis. And the mentoring piece is one that I really personally enjoy. I get a lot of pleasure out of creating relationships and seeing guys motivate themselves on an intrinsic level in order to affect their daily habits and routines. Seeing guys improve themselves beyond the game of baseball. While yes, it's great, and yes, I am judged on how guys produce on the field, what I kind of write home about is the things that they do after baseball, the things that they change in their time in baseball, and see where they go from that. So understanding that intrinsic piece and how to manipulate that intrinsic piece is extremely important for what I currently do. And then when talking about decision-making and leadership, decision-making, you know, I'm frequently working with 18 to 22-year-old people. And so sometimes that decision-making piece is kind of an ever-growing process there. And that's one thing that we really try to strive to push. You know, as leaders, the best way we can help manipulate decision-making is we properly make decisions. You know, if we exemplify those decisions, generally the people below us will follow. And then with the leadership piece, communication, constantly understanding that use of the rhetorical triangle is very important. Kind of a really good way to just connect with the guys on different levels. You know, you shouldn't always be hitting them with one piece at a time. If you're always just hitting them with logic, they're going to kind of get tired of that, resent it. Maybe some guys may not connect with that necessarily. You have to use different pieces of the triangle to connect with people in order to kind of, like I said, create that bigger intrinsic motivation. And all in all of this ties together when talking about athletes and motivating them and leading them down into a goal. You talk about the long-term application. I don't personally know if I see myself coaching long-term. And so I think an interesting piece for me is learning the differences between coaching and the business realm in terms of leadership, mentoring, decision-making, because it is different. But as you can see with the second bullet point, it's also the same to an extent. They can also overlap and be beneficial between the two. So I think learning the differences, I can't necessarily take over more of a dictator yelling role in a business frame depending on my job as I can being a coach. It's a little bit different of a relationship there. You think of being a coach, you think of there is that hierarchy to it. And even if you don't necessarily try to create that hierarchy, there is that hierarchy where in a business frame, you want to almost try to view yourself on an even playing field. Well, yes, there is naturally a hierarchy. Kind of viewing your people you work with as equals will really help them feel value. And that's one thing that our head coach does a great job of here. Obviously, he's the head coach. I'm an assistant coach, so I'm naturally below him. But he does a phenomenal job making everybody feel like their word is valued on the same playing field, whereas coaching, your word kind of is above all. So that's one difference that I may need to alter and kind of get used to. Where they can overlap is learning how to motivate people. Coaching is kind of all about the hoorah of motivating people into achieving a goal, and sometimes that can be lost in business. And so that's one thing in coaching that I've really learned is how to motivate people, how to figure out what motivates people. Some people you need to communicate with them with logic. Some people you kind of need to pull on the heartstrings a little bit and make them feel. And so in coaching, I've learned how to feel those things out, and then now that is something I may be able to take into the business world with me. Overall, leadership, decision-making, and mentoring is very important, whether you are in a sport, whether you are in the business sense, kind of whatever your job may be. Those three things will never go away and can always be further developed. You'll never be the best at it, but as long as you're continuing to try to grow in those areas, that's about all you can ask for, and that's what I'm going to try to do with my long-term applications, continue to grow in those and learn where the differences and overlap can be.